Hey, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be on the whole journey that most of us had together, which we started right after the killing of George Floyd, which as terrible as that, it seemed to have an effect of opening up a lot of people's hearts, and there seemed to be more open to maybe looking at different views. So I'm going to try to today use imagination to look as a way of enhancing empathy in people, in ourselves. And imagination, I see that as something that is over and above cognition and intellectualization. It's actually direct experience. So we will be proceeding with that. But before, empathy is the ability to understand another's feelings. Empathy comes from empathia, which means to be in feeling in ancient Greek. Um, so, but this on this subject, this I started thinking about the 11 months we've been together and working on these issues. What's it doing? Are we doing anything that's effective? We all intuitively know that it is. We've seen people's attitudes change that keep returning. We see people returning that we never would have expected returned. So, so what does that mean? And I think some of the experiences we had, it's the shared stories. Stories are storehouses of wisdom, and it's just shared experiences. It's the shared empathy for the martyrdom of George Floyd. Um, and so when I was thinking about this and seeing how this affects change and understanding and attitudes, I was I recalled some things that I had studied years ago about some experiments that started in 1953. And I'm just going to share them quickly. I'll give an abstract of these studies, but I think it's very relevant. It shows how cultural and transmissions can take place to increase awareness and bring about change. So the first study was done in 1953 by a group of Japanese scientists that they were studying primates. And they were studying these Japanese monkeys on this particular island in the South Pacific. And there was a group of monkeys on this island, and there was a group of monkeys on several islands around, all of the same species. Now, somewhere along the line in island, say island number A or number one, these monkeys, their food, their substances was sweet potatoes for some reason, and they weren't endemic to the monkeys, but the experimenters put these sweet potatoes in all three islands. So somewhere along the line, one of the younger monkeys got the idea that they should clean these sweet potatoes uh, in the seawater or in the streams to get the dirt off them. And so they started learning to do this. And then once a certain amount of monkeys did this automatically without being taught, um, then the rest of the monkeys on this island started to do it. So there was a transmission, and maybe that was by identification and watching these people do it. But strangely enough, it was the younger people that was doing it, and the older people were the last to learn, the older monkeys. So once a certain number of monkeys from this island number one was doing this behavior, suddenly island number two and island number three started to do the same piece of behavior. So, so I was writing about it. These things, once a species learns a certain behavior, it can be transmitted to the whole species. So this, I also thought this was pretty remarkable, and it's kind of on the cutting edge of science and metaphysics. And then there was another a professor at Cambridge in England, and he was a plant physiologist, and he got into this understanding, and they called this thing the 100th monkey theory, the one back at the original study. So the idea is, well, once 100 monkeys or 100 species, numbers of a species learns the behavior, it's transmitted to the whole behavior. So, but I don't think there were 100 monkeys on that, but that was the metaphor on that island. So Sheldrake put this up, and he started working on this understanding, and he called it morphic resonance where the species could transmit knowledge without actually being seen. So he erected, he was a professor at Harvard too. So he erected a maze for a whole group of rats. Say there were 100 rats, 200 rats in Cambridge, and then he divided, then he had another 200 rats at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So, and he built this peculiar maze, and he started teaching these a certain number of rats in Cambridge, England. And then once a certain number of rats learned how to get through the maze, the rest of the rats in Cambridge knew how to do it. And then all the rats in America, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, learned how to do it. So there was this morphic transmission that. And then, he did studies about, all these transmissions. So I started, taking it out of behaviors, but behavior is certainly related to beliefs and attitudes. I started to think of like how we can transmit empathy, and and maybe the bottom line of working towards social justice is empathy, and the more we can see each other, see ourselves in each other, then we're not going to be as rigid and dogmatic and prejudiced. And so then I started to think, this is more talking than I usually do, but then I started to think about colonialism, slavery, and Native American situation. And so, so the general person wouldn't believe in colonialism. The general person would generally not believe in slavery, and then certainly we wouldn't believe in genociding Native American. But it happened. So what was that? What was this state of belief that brought about this behavior? Now, I think there was motivations, and it's definitely by greed. So colonialism, transformed the people in Africa into brutes, and they needed to be educated by the church or something. But in the meantime, they were exploited fiercely. Every resource they had was just colonized and taken away. So, and then slavery, who would have, even the founding fathers did not believe in freedom, but they believed in making money from their cotton fields and their things. And so they would easily ignore that belief that this is inhumane for the profit of tobacco and cotton. And then the American Indians, the trade-off was they would create a belief that that we were destined to have the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and so this is like preordained, and so they spiritualized it, and just for the sense of Barbary. And so how do we reconcile, all these positive beliefs with these negative beliefs and actions? And, and I think there's this profound contradiction, but to the degree that the people who had the power, more of the power, could transform these beliefs into ways of manipulating people. So we hold this conflict between these two groups, which I think is, unbelievable. But I think but unbelievable, but true. We witnessed it. We've seen it. We've seen it in our own lives. And but I think I'm encouraged by connecting the dots where I've seen so much change in people that I didn't expect change. And so maybe the underlying hope is that we can possibly reach this sense of given enough people that a huge attitude change. And I think through our sharing of experience and through the whole sharing of these blatant acts of violence and murder, some of the shield and defenses are falling away, and people's attitudes are hopefully changing, and they have to continue. We have to continue to work at it. So I think this is all a prelude to doing some imaginal exercise, but I think this is encouraging. I take hope, and and I think it's one of the underlying reasons of why this work is helping, and it has continued to grow, and it's continued for this so many months, and hopefully it will continue into the future. So with that said, I'm going to but also back to the experiments of the monkeys and the rats learning the maze. There is always a kind of gain for this behavior that's learned, because they're they're able to get clean sweet potatoes, and they're able to get out of the capture of lack of freedom in the maze. So actually, interestingly enough, the word exercise, and I call these imaginal exercise, comes from a root called that is ex acre. So we all know that X is out of, and acre was enclosure. So when we do these, we get out of enclosure. So some of these exercises I'm going to do today, they're just exercises of putting us in touch with situations that uh, may have an empathetic response. And it's almost like a practice of empathy. And we can grow into that. There's probably much more exercises that I have that we can do today, but I will put a list of the exercises on our chat, and we'll send them to you at the end of the day of our work together. So let's see. And the end result of all empathy is a shared human commonality that we have, that we're born, we experience joy, we suffer, we people that we love, and people that we love die, and so we share that no matter what where we come from, and this is and this unites us. And then in the meantime, we have to survive, and we have to find a way of making a living, and without exploiting other people. So so we'll do a couple exercises, and then that'll probably bring us up to the allowed amount of time I have, and do these imaginal exercises. I just make a statement. You close your eyes, you breathe out, and the statement may elicit an image or a feeling. And if you would like to share what you experience, you're more than welcome. But you're perfectly free not to share responses. And they're not. And so one of the things of the imagery is to sort of just bring about affect, freedom. And I think, in the sense of the old Chinese proverb, a picture's worth 1,000 words. If we're able to see an image and see and experience the image with our senses, then that becomes the learning of the heart, because we can learn with experience, with feeling, with smelling, with all the senses. So we'll start to do some of these now, and after I do one, and these are short, I'll just stop and say, does anybody want to share? And then I assume that you'll be able to speak up and share if you'd like to. But maybe we'll go through like 3 or 4, or and then I'll leave the others for you to pick up later on your own. And remember, imagery is a practice, and practice is taking an action, and taking action to let things come into appearance. And when they come into appearance, we're in relation to it. It might be not make sense at first, but being in touch with something, you're in relationship to it, and it kind of gives up a certain understanding. Early Greek understanding of truth was aletheia. The word means that which comes out of hiddenness and comes into appearance, and you're in connection with it, for a while. So that's what we're trying to do. So I'm going to start to do some exercises and give you the chance to just express what you might feel or see. And please, there's nothing right or wrong. It's just what is. And what appears is what appears, and perhaps a meaningful experience happens, and the imagination will just tangentially, I ran a cancer center for many years where people undergoing chemo or radiation, we would have a whole list of imagination exercises that they would do. We would also add music to it. And that seemed to really enhance the immune function. And part of it was, we didn't do that on its own. We used every means physically and medically available to somebody, but we believe that enhanced it. And also it enhanced the belief of other possibilities in life. So anyway, we're going to start to do imagination exercises, and we'll do a few. So now I want you to just close your eyes and breathe through your nose, and then long, slow exhalations through your mouth. Breathing in all that's pure and breathing out all that's impure. And now I want you to see, sense, and experience yourself encountering the blank expression of a hungry child with a distended stomach. You're in relation to that image, and see if anything comes in your feelings, thoughts, or images. Again, there's no right or wrong. So see, sense, and experience yourself in encountering the blank expression of a hungry child with a distended stomach. And we can't like force it out. If something comes, it comes. If it doesn't come, that's fine too. But if anybody saw or experienced something and they'd like to share, just please feel free to speak up. And Bernadette, did you see anything?
Bernie, you're mute.
Yeah, I guess you'll have to unmute everyone too.
That is an image that's I didn't access it myself personally because it's something we're now have on the television every day from Syria. So I couldn't get into myself because the image was so present in my mind from the television.
But did you see that image, the television image? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's there's a lot of television, a lot of ads now that.
Okay, so it can be oversaturated. Yeah, that I can understand that. Yeah, so that was honest response. Anyone else see or experience anything they'd like to share?
Can I?
Please.
So I haven't just seen pictures, I've actually seen those children.
Mm.
And in the villages back in India.
Right.
And actually one of them was a neighbor who lost his father, who was a daily wage earner, and the next morning all the kids were on the street begging. These were the kids that we played with as children.
Yeah,
and they came with empty vessels, and my mother gave them some rice and some cooked food and so on. So and then that was less traumatic, but the more traumatic ones were the ones that I saw in the villages, where if I were to go back and look at them, I don't know what I felt then, I don't remember, but what I feel now is I would like to pick them up, clean them up, give them some food, give them a hug. That's what I would do if it was now.
That's beautiful, but that's, thank you. Anyone else like to share reaction or feeling?
I like to share. It's funny how you presented leading up to this, but the image that came up was an imagery that I had seen in my early 20s back in the UK, where it was in Africa, where there was a lot of famine going on, and obviously the plead and the ads to support these children. And I think many people who aren't in that situation or be in that situation, they feel like money is what will solve the problem. So whilst that was the image that I went to from back in the day, the imagery that I got of this kid was just looking at me, not in the sense of distress, but almost in some universal plane. I don't know where we were at, but it was just quietly looking at me and just saying, what if you could have done something different than donate money? And I got caught and I was thinking, what the heck would I have done differently in my 20s? And I certainly would do something different now with my experiences and awareness. But that's what came up, was an image of back in the day. And this child was at peace. It wasn't in distress, but it was just looking at me and saying, what if you could have done something different?
Oh, thank you. sharing. It's time. So let's
Excuse me, we have one more share from Martina.
sure, please. Would you like to share?
I had not really hi.
Hi.
I had not really any image. I just the word love came into my mind, and yeah, it's just when Rajan told his story, and it
Mhm.
just came, and I think with love and compassion, if we transform ourselves, or if we go this way, then we create understanding as well.
Right. So that's how immediate the image is. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, let's move on, and I want to close your eyes and breathe out a long, slow exhalation. And now I want you to see, sense, and experience yourself encountering a child filled with joyful enthusiasm. See whatever image comes to view or mind. Hmm. Anyone have an image or feeling?
Well, I immediately saw my nephews, and
Mm.
I absolutely adore them, you know.
Yeah,
So but that the joy that children have is amazing. So when when they are happy, they're full of it. You know,
Mhm.
they're full of happiness. So it was an easy access for me to to be right there beside them in my mind.
That's great. So it's that energetic reaction.
Well, that
Actually, please say.
it brought together the contrast that I would feel, that I felt for the child. To me, the sadness of the child that's starving, as opposed to in contrast to the child that's excited and, just brings life and joy. And whenever I see that, I want to be a part of it. I want to, go along for the journey and just watch and listen, to that. And then that great contrast between the two is just so,
Mhm.
it's so great. It's so powerful it's very, very powerful for me.
Mm. Okay, thank you for sharing. That's yeah, that's our life is full of contrasts and oppositions, and how do we hold that? Yeah. Anyone else would like to share?
It's
Joe.
interesting. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just
Oh,
calling on you.
oh,
Joe.
I was going to say it's interesting because I didn't see contrast. I saw possibility. And
Mhm.
so I saw the same child that I saw in the first image, but in a situation of the marriage of purpose and play. So in a situation where they could produce their own food and be part of a community that was thriving rather than starving. And it just was a different outcome to a similar story, or to a similar beginning.
Mhm.
And throughout this exercise, what keeps coming up for me is this idea of what small shifts might do to the longer term outcome. This
Mhm.
whole idea of expanding possibility.
Mhm. Yeah, that's and and I know Joe, you're working on agricultural incentives and not incentives and developments. And, and I think that, that's a wonderful way of looking at, even in the contrast, we can do something like what I call mandorla, where you have the, the motivation of the starving child is the motivation to make and expand in possibilities where people can be fed, where people weren't going to be starved. And, and it's all encircled by, I think, humanity, somebody that's alive with humanity and cares. So that's a wonderful narrative, a way of looking at it. Actually, one of my favorite Greek words is, enthusos, which enthusiasm comes from. And in ancient Greek, that meant to be filled with the gods, which is kind of a cool word when you think of, and I guess it's all the gods of Olympus, where they have all these different qualities and possibilities. And maybe when we have the energy and innocence as a child, we can be filled with these possibilities and find ways to activate them. Anyone else like to share something? Okay, we'll move to another exercise. Now, see, sense, and experience yourself through eyes closed, visiting a group of disabled people. Remember, whatever comes, comes. And would anyone like to share what came forth, or feelings or images?
I'll share. It's funny, I don't know if it was intentional with your exercises, Dr. Clifton, but the second one I didn't share, but that evoked a memory of me being very creative. And this one didn't evoke an event I remember or link to anything, but it all seemed to flow through, where the first imagery was, can you get out of your habit and imagine something different? The second said to me, you're very creative, how you use your limited resources to do something. Remember that. And then in this third situation, which is a little unknown to me, I didn't have a past or a present memory, but it kind of said to me, with your creativity, get out of your habit. How would you greet and meet these people? Not in your habitual way, but in a way that we all level up. We all level at the same space, that we don't regard each other as me being abled and them being disabled.
Yeah. So meeting at the human nexus. Yeah. Bernie, you came up. Would you like to share anything?
Actually, that was a good exercise for me. A long time ago, 1,000,000 years ago, I worked for the Irish Wheelchair Association, and we had a lot of, I ran the first integrated intercultural group between Europe and the Wheelchair Association, and we had a great deal of fun. But there wasn't as many facilities for disabled people back then. It's quite different now. And so we had, so some of our discussions would be on a more depressed level, if for the want of a better word. So when in that exercise, I was able to go back and give everyone a hug and meet everybody on the same, to see how we have come forward and how well we have done. It was a very nice experience for me. That passage of time actually took many of the sad things we had to discuss back then. They have been kind of removed from our relationship, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
So there's always, with more discussion, more empathy, and more time put into things, big improvements can happen in one lifetime.
Thanks for sharing. That's great. Anyone else like to share?
So for me, the image that kind of shows up, and I'm sure many of us might share the same kind of, it might share the same sentiment, but I usually see it as like a physical disability. That's kind of what first comes to my mind. And so I
Right.
guess we'll just take that as an opportunity to kind of challenge that stereotype that disability is something that's always physical and something that's noticeable and something that you can see on a person. Whereas that's really not the case. There's a lot of hidden disabilities. There's a lot of disabilities that you just can't see. And just because you can't see a disability doesn't mean that someone doesn't have it and lives day to day with that disability. So I guess that's kind of what I would take away from that, is challenging the stereotype that all people with disabilities like look the same, or that all disabilities are physical or noticeable at first glance. So yeah.
Yeah, that's extremely important understanding, because if we can be, you know, if someone's afraid to go outside, they're not going to be seen, but they're not free to go outside, you know, if they're so agoraphobic, and that's a real disability until they overcome it.
This is Rao. Dr. Clifton, being a physician, even though I'm in the United States, I'm seeing a bunch of patients are not only disabled, but are dying in India. That is the image I'm working with right now, trying to mobilize help and all that. But I've seen that in the United States also when the pandemic went into high gear. You know, for me, what it is imagination. I have gone beyond that into the perception. You know, so my senses perceiving, I kind of stay in the present. You know. So not in the past, not in the future imagination, but here and now, you know. And also I cannot rely on the human intelligence, you know. So feeling for the people and understanding the suffering, and all of that are really live experiences for us. And also we kind of plan for the what are the relief measures we want for the anything like a pandemic or a disease or anything like that. So I'm brought up on the systems where they are beyond mind, and what are the faculties we have as human beings, being really sympathetic to our fellow beings, because the whole thing is based on oneness. We are all connected at one consciousness. So people are suffering. For example, the first thing about a kid asking for alms or money or food, that brought me a saying by J. Krishnamurti. He had a school, his kids were studying there, not his kids, but the kids were studying there. They see a beggar outside the gate of the school, and he stops them and asks them, what was your feeling when you saw somebody like that in that state? And then they take the discussion to what kind of society created some of the citizens should be begging, you know. So when you go into that kind of discussions, then you are brought forth suffering right in front of you, and then you just not like information, but more like a experience that has empathy, you know. So I just wanted to let you know that mine is perception and intelligence, and here and now in the present.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, we differ. Mine is ecstatic temporality, where past, present, and the future can happen in the same moment. So I'm always who I was born, you know, in experiences I had, but we can move beyond it. Like your exercises last week were fabulous in the sense of, you know, putting breath back into a person's lungs and opening up the possibility. But remember, in Psyche, the British word, the Greek word for soul, the root is butterfly and breath. You know, so you know, I applaud your work. but you know, in a sense of like beginning of Oliver Twist. Oliver is in this reformatory and he asks for more porridge. And you know, he's persecuted, he's chased down by the headmasters, you know, for what an absurd idea to have ask for more porridge. And so that's the kind of attitude that I'm seeing has to change, you know, and imagination can help change that attitude when you see a commonality of soul, of purpose. So now I got one more exercise, and I think it actually reflects on the oneness. Actually, I used to, Krishnamurti was an amazing guy. We saw him a lot in New York with his whole history is extraordinary. But he was really close to a physicist at the University of London, Bohm, who had the holographic theory of physics as opposed to the Newtonian one. So anyway, let's just do this last exercise, and maybe, you know, and I'll have the list of other exercises you can continue to do. But this is, so everyone close their eyes, breathe through their nose and long, slow exhalation through their mouth. And then I would like you to see, sense, and experience yourself approaching a homeless, disheveled human being sitting on a large piece of cardboard on a sidewalk. Experience yourself sitting down beside this person and look into their eyes. Be aware of what you feel. Then breathe out a long, slow exhalation. Return to your regular breathing. And now look again into the eyes of this person. And the eyes have transformed and become mirrors. And see and experience what is reflected back from these mirrors. And when completing, you just breathe out and open your eyes. And would anyone like to share?
I will share. The moment you started talking about the homeless person on the cardboard, I actually got I felt a smell, you know. I felt like, oops, this is going to be smelly. And I wasn't, I went along and did as you said to do, but to be fair, I wasn't fully into it. You know, I wasn't, and I was saying to myself, where did your empathy go, Bernie? Is this a thing to do with COVID? Are you incapable of doing this exercise, just going with it and be empathetic to a person who, and then when it was very profound, when you turned it back and I was looking in the person's mirrors,
yeah,
I felt maybe that they were feeling sorry for me, you know, that they felt like, oh, God love this poor old dear, I have to be nice to her. And, but it didn't happen. You know, there was no shared, nothing got shared until that moment, you know. So I don't know what that is. I can't explain it, but that's how it happened for me.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. That's food for thought and meditation. But where please.
Yeah, this brought me back to what I do with my patients on a daily basis. We have this greeting, Indian greeting, what's called Namaste. The meaning of it is that at the core of our inner being, where the awareness or inner consciousness, we are like a life force that is almost like the infinity or the God, whatever you think. And we all have that. Without that, we don't have any body and mind. So anything external to that is like kind of acquired, but the real us is that, So I'm kind of greeting that kind of divinity with my divinity. So I'm excluding any conditional factors, like a male or female or country, race, or anything like that. And beyond that, I'm looking at the core of him. So I say namaste in my mind when I go into the room, and then I don't have any judgments or anything about that man or woman, and I see them what they are. That helps a lot to be at a humane level and trying to react to that. That came to my mind. There's something I always look into the eyes. That's what happens to me. Thank you.
That's a wonderful practice. Thank you. That's really just seeing the divine in each other. So there's no separation. That's part of what the oneness that you were talking about before. Wonderful. Oh. Anyone else like to share?
Pilar, do you want to read out what you wrote?
Sure. I said I pictured a colleague of mine who I recently found out experienced homelessness in her late teens, when right after she came out and her family turned her away. And I had no idea that was in her past. Even after working closely with her, I realized how much unconscious bias I have had in my life when I think of someone who's experiencing homelessness and who that person is, how they came to experience this. And now I think how easily it could be me. If it could be my coworker, it could be me. So when you asked us to kind of reflect ourselves back, I kind of was already seeing myself there. And I think it's because like literally this week I was talking to her and found out that she'd experienced homelessness for almost 2 years on and off in her teens. And I would have never known that then. So it gave me perspective about who is homeless and what causes people to experience homelessness. And sort of like, in her case, it was because her family didn't accept her for who she was. And, she went from living in an upper middle class family to having nowhere to go. And so that kind of struck me that this came up just after I'd found out, I think it was like Wednesday that I learned this about her.
That's great. Thank you.
To piggyback off of Pilar, my first image was the question that came to mind was what happened? Because for me, I think most people are not born on the streets. It may happen, but most people are not, that's not where they start. So that was that question for me first was, what happened? And then that empathy piece, looking back in the mirror, it was like, this could have been me, because we may all be one bad decision away from, or one bad experience from. And so that recognition that we can flip the script at any time. In sitting beside the person, that could be me sitting there. And, as I said, I don't envision that person being born on the street. So something happened. And for me, it was wondering what could have happened.
Yeah.
I just want to add and piggyback off that, which is a very good summary. I actually had a real experience, so it was hard for me to imagine. Many decades ago, coming out of work, we regularly, a friend of mine would regularly see a homeless person, and my immediate go-to thing was, we must help them, we must feed them, we must bring food. And that's what we did one day. And it turns out what we found out, and to the point of it, we weren't born on the streets. Turns out this individual is very wealthy, extremely wealthy, has money. So we may not always assume and jump to they need money or food. It was something happened that was already spoken about earlier. And so when I see homelessness, I have to say, what happened to you to be here? and the help they're looking for may not be necessarily how we process it ourselves. And I think that empathy has to be not just from our assumptions, it has to be something where we have to ask and listen. And I think that's one thing I'm learning is having to learn to listen more, because my experience cannot explain and be projected for every new situation I encounter.
No. That's a great point.
We have one more share.
Yes.
Oh no, I was just reacting. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we're good.
Can I quickly jump in?
Please.
I wasn't looking at so much of what happened or why, but trying to reflect on the feeling. If I was in that situation, what would I be feeling? And two predominant feelings. The stronger feeling was despair. The not so strong, perhaps a very weak feeling of hope. And then I put myself in the other situation, came to the other side and said, okay, what do I feed? Do I feed the despair or do I feed the hope? And that's what I took away from it. I don't need to focus on the despair. I need to focus on the hope and feed that hope somehow, is what I took away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, I guess the hope, the hope leads to action, but, the sad thing is why we have to keep changing is like all these suppressed groups in the world today and in America in particular, there was a lot of hope taken away because they didn't see possibilities. There were, even when policies were being made to help different groups, people couldn't even, imagine that a mortgage was possible or a loan was possible. I think I gave the example of some woman that was running a laundromat, and she was just struggling, and we found out that she was be totally eligible for a PPP loan, and she just couldn't believe it until we were able to get somebody from the small business to come and visit her and say, look, you're eligible. So it's that lack of belief of what's possible. So I think as our attitudes change, and maybe the hope can be experienced more. I mean, inspirational people that can put that across, and people who have gotten through hard experience, they become lanterns of light that can create certain hope in each other. And but hope leads to action, and possibility does too. So we accept our past, but we have to see where we are, and then move to wholeness or health. And so anyway, we've sort of went way over, but that's what the exercise. I really appreciate everyone sharing their experiences, and then we'll go to the breakout groups.
Thank you, Dr. Clifton. Thank you so much for those exercises.